Finally, after years of bunny lore, alas, it will all be in one place. So, first of all, let me explain a little bit about lore and what this video will do and, the future lore. So, if you don't know, lore is basically the design of a character and the explanation of the world and the reasons behind characters do what they do. In simple terms, it can be considered like a backstory or just like a story in general. Some people have their lore or backstory set in stone and don't really evolve it or change it. They just kind of have some kind of like little flavor text being like, I'm a fairy that delivers dreams to you. So that's why I do ASMR. Or I am a god who plays video games in my spare time because I want to, I guess. Most VTubers at least have a tiny bit of lore. Though most people just kind of have it for flavor and don't really do too much with it. My story is constantly growing, however, and it is continuing to go for it. I've always loved storytelling, which it should show through some of my ASMR scenarios, so I take lore very, very seriously, and I have a lot of it. So that's what lore is. What is this video gonna do? Well, my lore, while connected and makes sense in my mind, is completely scattered over the cross of many videos, many streams. So it would be really hard to go through everything, know where to look for everything, and find all the answers. So this video's goal is to summarize everything of the lore that's been revealed so far all in one spot. Not everything will be handed to you. I put a lot of hints and stuff, and I do want people to be able to come up to their own conclusions and have their own hypotheses on characters and their goals and ideas and like plot points and stuff like that. But basically, everything in this video will have been 100% revealed already. This video will definitely be long, but if you haven't noticed everything, if you haven't noticed already, everything is going to be time-stamped, meaning if you look down at the little time bar at the beginning, like the video, when you move your mouse, it'll show, this will probably say something like introduction or beginning, and then there'll be like something that's like Shiry, Chompers, Yuki, there's going to be timestamps for everything. So if you're ever wanting to come back to a character or wanting to come back to this video because you forgot something about settings or a character or anything like that, you can always go back here and you'll be able to find anything, everything. It'll be in the description, as well as just actual like timeline bar, when you move your mouse over. So basically, that means I'm going to be going over everything in chunks, whether that be location, meaning, backstory, or character. I'll also tell you what video you could have found this information from, and at the end, I'll give hints for hidden lore. And the final portion will be the Q&A. Now, lastly, the story will continue. There will be mangas or mangas that push forward the story, so keep an eye out for those. So basically, my story is not stagnant. There's going to be things that happen in the story that, change things in the future, such as like right now, I only have a flower shop. I do not have an alchemy shop. I do not sell my potions. I only have a flower shop, though I do have an alchemy lab beneath my flower shop. In the future, if there's ever some kind of expansion or we find a way to go into a different setting, there may be a different store as well, like the alchemy store, and then having a flower shop beneath the alchemy, or not a flower shop, but like a little meadow underneath it. So consider it like a vice versa. But I'm going a little ahead of myself right now. But I do think the best place to start would be the WORLDO. Before we start talking about any bunnies or flower shops, we should talk about the world we live on. It is not Earth and has its own set of rules and systems. The world is called Ludus, and it is completely separate from our reality. was the world created? At first, there was nothing but a single core filled with a mass amount of energy. Over time, each of those energies slowly grew out their own agendas and began to repel, until eventually the core split into 10 different sources. Each of those 10 sources created land, flora, and fauna to protect itself, explore, and work towards their own goals. Think of them as like a little ball. Okay, so you know how the Earth has a core? Think of it as if the Earth had 10 different cores, and each of them had its own source of power. So like I guess the Earth's core would be like heat, I guess. There's different cores such as like mana and potential and energy and like that. And each of them basically give power and are what created everything around it. So basically, let's see. In simple terms, each source created a continent. The continent and its inhabitants were all originally born from the source itself. Each continent has different flora and fauna that almost makes it feel like you're in a completely different world than the other continents, since most sources are so different. The two known continents are currently Eusaga and Auroraetia. Eusaga's source is its potential, and the source of Auroraetia is mana. Each creation of the source is able to hold their source inside of them. The magical continent, or Auroraetia, has magic, which is basically converting mana into something. Each creation or person has a specialty, and there's 4 major origins of magic, though there are 5 in total. All magic is defined by creation from mana conversion. All creations of mana have a certain affinity for one of the 5 origins of magic. All magic stems from one of these primordials. For example, you would not be able to convert mana into fire without tapping into an elemental origin, and you wouldn't be able to create a sword or illusions from seemingly nothing without tapping into theoreticals, or the magic of thought. Every creation is born with an affinity and a specialty in their affinity, such as being elemental from birth with a specialty in water, though they may work towards altering their specialty by combining their affinity that they gained when they were born with a secondary minor affinity. An example of this would be an elemental affinity with a specialty in water, gaining a minor affinity of theory, focusing on the theory of creation to create a scimitar of water. In turn, transforming creation's specialty from water magic to water blade magic. A creation can also forego the ability to gain a minor element to delve deeper into the major affinity, altering specialty from water to weather for so forward, you know. It's basically, the magic system is as creative as you can get it. Like that's how I feel. Like if you can imagine a magic, as long as you can imagine it, there's most likely a way to make it happen if you work hard towards it. The affinities seem to be aligned in a spiral, going in a clockwork direction of the natural flow of mana. The affinities go as follows: elemental, theoretical, inevitability, spiritual, and which then leads back into elemental. Okay, so basically, I don't want to. This goes like really far into deep. Basically, all you need to know about magic is there's a system in place. It's very in depth. There's 5 affinities. There's elemental, theoretical, inevitable, and spiritual, as well as source magic. So there's elemental magic, theoretical magic, inevitable magic, spiritual magic, and source magic. Source magic is the really fancy one where it is not normal to have it. Like 1 in a million people have it. It's like very rare and very strong magic. Of course, this is considered the magical. This is purely for the magical continent. If you are in the modern continent, I haven't even started talking about there's 2 continents. We have stated that. I haven't even started talking about the modern continent. So yeah, the modern continent, which is called Auroraetia, has something similar to the mana system, the magic system. Instead, it is a potential system, because just like here on Earth, everyone has potential, and you can turn that potential, you can turn that determination into potential and create things with it. You can create things with your potential, your determination, whether that be like feats of strength and stuff like that. So people here have their own system as well. It's not just, you know, it's not magic. They can't make magic. And you know, like there's cons to that, and there's like boons to that too. Like it's not all negatives, pros and cons. The modern continent's creations or people can hold potential and can use determination to convert the potential into something. Potential is the source that created fauna and flora of Eusaga. So just like how the core of a continent is something, the core of the magical continent is mana. The core of the modern continent is potential. Potential is what powers everyone, because that is what the core is essentially made out of. It is a ball of potential. That is what fuels everything. That's what fuels all of the life on that continent. And so the life from that continent is able to tap into its source, which would be potential. While most other sources normally have a variety of intelligent species, potential is only known for one major species, that being humans. There are animals, but no species other than humans can harness the potency of potential at the same level as humans. Similar to mana, humans are able to hold in potential and transform potential into energy and motivation. However, unlike mana, potential can't be used in the same sense of magic. While mana can be turned into magic to alter the outside, potential can be turned into determination to alter the inside. While potential may be considered one of the weakest of the sources when it comes to power level, it can also be the most terrifying. Humans are scary. It's always been like that. One major difference between magic and determination would be the lack of awareness the continent knows. What was once common knowledge has been hidden away and lost to the sands of time. So, while the magic continent knows to research and practice mana, humans don't know about potential/determination. All they have to go off of is feeling, not knowing they can focus into their source and grow their potential. This means all humans are growing their potential through natural means and growth instead of focusing their training to cater towards it. Only the Sagans from Nagasekt still have this knowledge, but seem to be scared to share it with the rest of the world, afraid of the past repeating itself. Just like there's 5 different types of magic, there's 5 different types of determination as well, which all lead into different things. There's physical, mental, innovation, empathy, and pure potential. Physical determination can allow for bursts and bouts of adrenaline to pump through a human's veins, doing things seemingly impossible. Some events may cause this to happen, like the super strength a mother may get when protecting her child, or it may come from intense training from things such as martial arts. Mental determination can allow for intense focus or bursts of golden ideas when it comes to problem solving. Innovative determination can allow for golden eras of creation or advances in technology. Empathetic determination allows for understanding, care, and nurturing. Lastly, pure potential, similar to source magic, is astronomically rare. Having an affinity for potential is already rare, but having it means nothing if you don't know about potential, as you can't train it if you don't know it exists. Your potential gives you the potential to harness the power of other sources, the potential of the world. Now, let's talk about the continents. These continents, this is still the setting. This is still the WORLDO. This is just like before Shiry and everything like that. This is just the world setting. This is what we are on currently. I haven't even started getting into like the flower shop and Shiry and Chompers and all that stuff. Let's talk about these continents. To make it much more simple, Eusaga is basically the modern continent. So think of it as Earth, like the real world. The technology is the same as the real world. So imagine if everyone on Earth was on one continent. That's Eusaga. And basically back to the Pangea ages. And on the other hand, we have Auroraetia, which you can think of as the magical continent. This one would be more of your stereotypical fantasy magic realm. I'll be referring to them as modern continent and magical continent for an easier time for the rest of this. The two continents are currently not aware of each other or the other continents aside from the top government chains from both. The magical continent has 7 regions and the modern continent has 7 countries. Now let's talk about Auroraetia, the magical continent, which has 7 regions. The first region is called Auroraetia. This is the capital region of the continent, and it's basically a prestigious floating city filled with all of the people that have proven themselves in some way. It's a very sophisticated city, super pristine, white walls, you know. Some of the strongest people live there, and you can only go there if you are summoned. This is where everyone wants to be. This is where they strive to be. This is like, you can't just buy your way into this place. You have to have earned something to get there. It has some of the most powerful magic. However, they are also farthest away from the source. So because they're floating in the air and they're farther away from the source, they may have very potent mana and, you know, magic and stuff like that. Like, they may have really, really strong spells, but they aren't close to the core. So it's not as amazing as it seems. Next is my favorite one, by the way. It's called My Land, which can also be considered the elemental region. This region is one of my favorites. The second most dangerous region, separated into 4 dangerous subregions, with one small safe spot in the middle of the region itself where the ruler lives. It's ruled by whoever can conquer all the regions, each ruled by an elemental deity consumed by their element. It's not actually like a god. They just consider, they're so strong they just consider themselves deities, but think of it as just like a really, really buffed elemental. Each of these deities are fighting over their domain and are at odds with each other. After conquering them, you then have the right to fight the ruler, and you get to name the region. The region has only been conquered once, and the person who conquered the region didn't really care, so he called it My Land, because that's all it was to him. It was his land, he conquered it. Why do you care what it's called? It's advised to avoid the area as it's very dangerous. That doesn't mean everyone listens though. A lot of people die there. Mount Tripped is your typical mountain region where you get your smithing, you know, your metalworking, or getting mountain living, dwarf enjoyer type of place. Very simple here. Dimensius is one of probably the second most creative place. I really like this place as well, right next to the elemental region. This place is considered the slums, where you leave your unwanted to die. This is directly below Auroraetia and is the chunk of land that was taken out of the ground that, you know, is now floating in the sky. This is basically, you know, the floating city in the sky that we talked about first. You know, Auroraetia. See, this is the chunk they took out. Like, it's just sunken earth. Deep. It's a city-sized chunk in the earth. And this, because there's a floating city above it, this place gets no sunlight and is sunken very, very deep into the land. It is almost impossible to get out of this place since the walls are too steep to climb and the soil is too dense with mana to try and create some kind of staircase out of it. This place has some of the most unique magic though, because of how close they are to the core. Though they are very, very, very isolated. Kamimiru is the peaceful village that's home to the Kamimis, which are basically the human-animal hybrids. They originated here and are the only race that slipped into the modern continent before access was cut off. Up next, we have Karai, a terrifying forest that is essentially the border of the magical continent. No one dares to venture through it and try and figure out what's beyond the forest. Aleutian is a typical hunt, tribal type of people who believe in the cycle of life. They live in harmony with the animals, similar to Kamimiru, but in a less peaceful way. Mana-rich animals live there. So, each region has its own governmental system, and the continent as a whole has a single magistrate called the High Council that is represented from each region to discuss very important topics. Auroraetia has a Menetrax, which is basically 3 rulers that keep each other in check in case someone grows corrupt. My land has a single ruler depending on who conquered the land. Mount Tript has a king and council to advise him. Dementius has no real government as far as they're aware of. Mimaru finds their rulers through tradition and a ritual. No one knows the ritual aside from all others have seen in it. Kurai Marie has a single ruler, but the ruler doesn't know that the seat in the High Council has been empty, despite the fact that the council knows who the ruler is. And Lucian has a bi-monthly hunt to determine who the ruler is. Now we get to go to the modern continent, Eusaga. The modern continent, like said, has 7 countries. Yuki is one of the leading countries when it comes to advancement in technology and seems to have mellowed out over the years, giving up its quest for conquest and expansion and instead putting more resources and time into expanding their efforts and into discovering and making more advancements towards technology. Despite most resources going towards knowledge, they still have the strongest military, one of the 4 original countries. That's what they were. Lumitome are basically most obsessed with inventing stuff. Even have their own day called Luminescence Day, where they show off their inventions. They hope they can shine the brightest. They were formed after the Great Requiem War to get away from it and focus on their discovery. We'll focus on discovery. Human Bach is basically the hotbot of all that were rejected or wronged during and before the war. They worked together and have a strong sense of community, creating an entire country out of nothing. Now one of the strongest countries, using the war as a foothold they needed to create a much more fair country that accepts all. Exectimus is a mysterious country, one of the 4 original countries when the continent first existed. They stay hidden, very bad vibes though. It's theorized that there's some sort of puppet master and might have even had a hand in starting the war, using the war to their advantage. Loomland kinda sprouted at the top of the unexplored continent during the Requiem War. They were weird half-human, half-animal hybrids, though they are still rare, but they have diversified and they're now known as hybrids. A pretty peaceful country. Slattenberg is the original powerhouse of the war and the antagonist, and are now one of the weakest countries, caring only about power and expansion. They saw themselves as superior to everyone else, and they did have the strength to back it up. One of the 4 original countries. Sadly, they lost the war. Spoiler. Not really though. Nagasekt was one of the 4 original countries. These are the most primitive of the countries, choosing to reject technology and stick to the roots of the continent and its founders, not tempted by advancements. They are strong for some reason and managed to survive the war. They are decently shrouded in mystery, but are friendly. There are 2 types of government. And that leaves us on to government, just like how, the magical continent had their own fancy high council. There is a nationwide safeguard against wars named United Nation of Eusaga, where 3 representatives from each country come together to prevent disagreements and wars before they even happen. And each country has their own system in place for cities, zones, and states inside of them, of course. So there's a little meeting place for all the countries combined, and then each country has their own government, is basically how this is set. Yukia has a prime minister with state government representatives. Lumitone has a council of inventors. Hemenbach has a president. Exectimus has a secretive system. Loomland has a community system. Slattenberg has a king, and Nagasekt has an elder. The continents both had something preventing each other from exploring the other continent. The magical continent had the draconic invasion, and the modern continent had the war. It was called the Great Requiem War. It was very cool. By the time both had stabilized, there was the Dark Forest / Karaimori that had sprouted, basically becoming the border that prevented any exploration. Of course, there's a lot more history, and this is only the basics of each region / country and the world itself. There is a 50-minute audiobook and 15+ page document for Chapter 1 of the Lore Bible, if you're curious about the world itself. This can be found on Patreon, as well as bits and pieces on the community tab of YouTube for the lore quizzes. There's still a ton more to flex out, and interesting stories to tell and write. This is all before Shiry was even born, and it's basically the foundation of the world and the continent itself. Though, that leads us into our next topic, current day. Finally, onto the current day. Now, this will be the current main characters and settings, though we may delve into backstories. Let's start with the major setting and, where most streams take place in. So we have our main setting, which is Bunny Blossoms. And, what directly surrounds it. Bunny Blossoms is the name of the flower shop that Shiry owns. Hi, that's me. To the left of the shop is a lake that is extremely pretty, but hard to swim in as it is unstable, a mixture of potential and mana, though it is only a weak mixture, unlike the Dark Forest. To the right of the shop is a flower labyrinth, or like flower maze. This maze is constantly shifting, so only Shiry, that's me, will know the right answer. Anyone else who would be trapped is basically at my mercy. Behind the shop would be the meadow, and behind the meadow is the Dark Forest, which past the forest leads into the magical continent. Now we have the actual shop itself. There are technically 4 settings inside of the shop. There's the flower shop portion, the Chompers portion, alchemy lab portion, and the Fluffle burrow portion. The flower shop is the main setting. It's where Shiry hangs out during the day and are where the streams would take place. Streaming is considered the flower demonstrations, which is basically Shiry showing off the flowers, which is showcased in the Bunny Blossoms manga. It's filled with many flowers and has a door that is near the back of the shop that is off limits. If someone decides to enter the scary door, they would be led into the chambers. The chambers is essentially the point of no return, and is what happens when someone subscribes or follows during a stream or on any platform. My welcome message whenever someone follows is always welcome, welcome, welcome to the Fluffle, which is the same as in the manga when the person is taken. Essentially, there are 2 options when entering the chambers. If you are a good person, you'll be turned into a Fluffle. If you're a bad person, you'll be living in the chambers for the rest of your life to be Shiry's test subject. Going far enough down the chambers will lead to a giant metal door. Going through the giant metal door will lead you into what seems like an entirely different world. The door looking like wood now instead of the metal. There's wisps for lighting, magical crystals, and other otherworldly stuff. This is essentially what Shiry has collected from the magical continent. Alchemy as well was started in the magical continent. On the rare occasion when someone could not use magic, they would typically turn to a different skill. Alchemy is one of those few. At the end of the alchemy lab, there is always 2 ways to go. There's an elevator that leads to the meadow, or a hatch underneath a pot that leads to the Fluffle burrow. If you go down the hatch, you'll essentially be led to the home of the Fluffles. This place is infinitely expanding, constantly digging and creating more spaces and creations. If you go up the elevator, you'll lead to the meadow, which puts you behind the flower shop, making it much easier to get back to the entrance. And that basically explains all of the basics across the settings directly involving the main setting. All of this information can be found scattered across videos, but the big ones would be the ASMR settings and locations video, the Bunny Blossoms manga / video, the Bunny Blossoms VRChat world, where you can explore 3 major spots in the Bunny Blossoms. You can do the shop, chambers, and the alchemy lab. So if you're curious and want to get a more personalized view, you can always go into the VRChat world. It is a public world, and I think it's very well made. I'm very proud of it. I didn't make it myself. I did commission it. Juice was the one who made it. They are very pog. And now that we're done with the settings, we can finally dig into the main course, the characters. And we'll be starting with the most important one, you. Which, the Fluffle is you. It's our mascot. The lovable little plushy bunny-like creature. All Fluffle are immortal. Essentially how Fluffle are made is from drinking a potion that separates the body from their soul into their most potent form. And the soul creates a husk for the Fluffle that gets rid of any kind of dysphoria, which is essentially your best form. The Fluffle are very customizable, but currently have 4 major factions based around their personality. There's the Sleepy, which is the tired little lads, our major mascot. The Hyper, which are the bouncy, zoomy type of Fluffle. The Sadistic, which are more of the introverted types that would rather be alone in a room researching, or the Yandere type who like to have a bit of spice to them. The last is the Wholesome, which is exactly what they sound like, the caring type of souls. You can typically find the faction based on the flower that they have on the head. The Wholesome have a flower on the side of their head. The Sadistic also have a flower on the side of their head. The Hyper have a flower on their forehead. And the Sleepy have petals for eyebrows. The Fluffle expands indefinitely when it comes to the Fluffle Burrow, so eventually you can have whatever you'd like. Giant movie theater, bowling alley. Think of it as how'd you dig underground in Minecraft, and you would just keep digging and building forward under the ground. Like just all on the same y-axis, just constantly going forward with nothing to stop it. If you want to learn more, all of this information can be found in the Discord server, as well as linked to the Fluffle personality test, which you can take and will be linked down below if you want to figure out what kind of Fluffle faction you'd be. On top of that, you can also click on something called the Fluffle at the end of the Fluffle faction test, where it's basically, you can click on learn more about the Fluffle and it will take you to a document called the Fluffle. And it teaches you all about the Fluffle. It's very cutesy, it's very nice, and you should definitely give it a watch or a read. Now, the other character that is you is the Listener. The Listener is also you. The Listener is both canon and not canon. It's a hypothetical what if. What if you didn't turn into a Fluffle? What if you're the one person Shiry could trust? What if you lived with Shiry and was his roommate? It's the point of view of ASMRs exclusively on YouTube. So the Listener's in a weird spot in the lore, somewhat existing, but not exactly. It's really weird. And now we get on to Shiry. That's me. We get on to the bunny boy himself. We're gonna separate me and the rest of the characters in 2 different categories, which is backstory and current day. So let's start off with the backstory. Essentially, as a young bun, Shiry was the shy, cute, adorable little boy that would constantly hide behind their parents, and everyone adored when visiting. Shiry's family included a twin brother, a mother who loved flowers, took care of a garden, and his father, who was an alchemist and loved, making potions. Since Shiry was too shy to really leave the house, unlike his extroverted twin brother, he spent a lot of time with his mother and father, letting him learn a lot about alchemy as well as caring for flowers. During this time, he often experimented his potions on himself, even though he'd get scolded by his father. Some effects of this testing are still affecting him today, such as the unusual pupils, which also permanently damaged his eyes, the flower being connected to his outfit, the flower in my hair, as well as the constantly falling petals from his hair. Not everyone knows all the side effects that have been put on him. Those are only the obvious. The potions could have also intensified or enhanced some emotions as well, explaining his view of the world, or maybe he always saw it the way he does. Shiry loved his brother very much and often missed him since his brother went outside to play in the forest. One day, after his brother had been gone for what seemed like weeks, Shiry decided to use his alchemy to try and get his brother to come back home. Maybe because of his heightened emotion, he made a flask of alchemy fire, something not even his father had been able to make. The fire was impossible to put out, and Shiry was sitting in the middle of the house waiting for his brother to come back. His parents, of course, saw this as an emergency and rushed back into the house to try and save Shiry. not knowing that, he was perfectly fine. The fire didn't affect him. It wouldn't affect him. They ended up getting afflicted by the fire and passing away. Though the smile on Shiry's face could not go away because he finally got to see his brother again. Nowadays, Shiry has built the flower shop in the same spot the original house had been burned down, the meadow now being the supplies of the shop he now had. He had learned his lessons and now uses others to test on instead of himself, choosing only to test on those that are horrible. Shiry's trope is essentially cute and innocent, but is actually terrifying and sadistic. Essentially, he is unstoppable in his own territory and has insane intelligence, able to stay 20 steps ahead of people playing 5D chess, as well as being very speedy. His weaknesses are essentially that he isn't very strong physically, and he doesn't really care to use his power. He'd much rather toy with others and focus on research. His one goal is knowledge. Shiry is about 500 years old, give or take, being born a few years before the war ended. He stays young, he stays young using potions, but isn't immortal. He can still die of wounds, just not age. There are basically two requirements for having a chance of beating Shiry. You need to get him out of his territory and focus on one of his weaknesses, mostly being his sensitive ears, whether that be loud noises or finding a way to touch or harm the ears. He is a concern to both governments, both of which have their eyes on him, not knowing if he's a threat. He hasn't done anything warranting being taken down, but they are watching him build up power with every experiment that goes by. He essentially acts as a gatekeeper for both sides, as the only way to go to and from the magical and modern continent would be through the dark forest and the flower shop. Essentially, someone from the modern continent would need to make it through the chambers to get to the meadow, to then get to the forest, but would end up turning into a Fluffle, because once you see the chambers, it's too late. Though technically Shiry is saving those from ending up dying by going into the forest, as only 3 people as of now can go into the forest and live. The lethality rate of the forest is 100%. Though most of those from both continents just don't know of the other continent's existence. Shiry is very charismatic and is often seen as sweet and adorable, and his end goal is to help others. He just has a strange way of doing it. His potions will eventually help and save the world, but some may consider his ways of doing it evil. Though it's not like many know what he's doing, they can only speculate. No one really knows what he's doing, and you can find these through the playlist on the ASMR channel. There's a bunch of stuff said over the years. Now we have Chompers. His name is Yairi. This is Chompers, my beloved. I love him dearly. He is absolutely precious. For those of you who don't know, this is probably my favorite character. I love his design. And as for his goal, his only real goal is to kill Shiry. Now let's start off with the backstory. Chompers was always a happy, energetic, extroverted little kid. He would love playing outside in the meadow, always hugging anyone he could. He would rarely be seen without a smile on his face, being a bundle of giggles. One thing Chompers always had an aspect for would be loving and being loved by animals. He would often go out into the happy forest to play with his animal friends. At first it would just be a few hours, but each time he went to visit, the animals would want him to stay longer. So hours would turn into a few hours, then to many hours, then to days, and eventually sometimes even weeks at a time. The parents knew he was safe and protected by the animals, but his brother missed him dearly. Chompers loved playing with his brother, and was the only one to actually get his brother to come outside and play, but his brother would never follow him into the forest, too scared to. Though on one odd night, instead of the animals trying to keep him in the forest, they were trying to get him to go home. A single butterfly leading the charge as he was led to his house and his parents burning. It was all a blur through the tears in his eyes, though only one sight was ingrained in his mind. His brother smiling at him as if he didn't care that their parents were in such a horrible condition. And so while the parents were begging Chompers not to blame anyone or to hold grudges, Chompers would run away, crying, his angers and his emotions burning, boiling. Eventually that burning turning to actual flames, singeing his hair, clothes, and even burning his skin at first. But he didn't care. Only one question radiated around his mind, and that being why. At the young age of 8, he ended up living in and growing up in the happy little forest. But the forest was special because it laid on the edge, the border between the two continents. It was at a point where the air was both rich with unstable mana and unstable potential, which would be suffocating to most, but he lived in it. The unstable condition to the heavy air, but he lived in it, was conditioned to the heavy air, and eventually his own mana and hatred led into the already unstable area, creating the dark forest as we know it, filled with hatred for anything that's humanoid or bunny-like. He destroyed his own bunny ears, wrapping them around his throat as if it was a scarf, hindering his hearing. He probably hears the same as a normal human would hear now. He burned away at the Garrett birthmark on his cheek and hides it behind a band-aid or a bandage. His one goal now being simple. Kill Shiry. Now, current day, Chompers basically has the unstable mana stopping him from growing old. And he's also extremely strong. While his body was slim and almost seemed younger, his muscles were dense and filled with unnatural power, able to lift things that weighed too heavy with ease. And his main weapon is a gigantic butterfly scythe that has been created over the years. While he had absolutely no training with magic, his was immensely intense, though often harmed him when using it. His flames were some of the hottest. His teeth are razor sharp. His eye almost seems like a pupil was burned and had ash lingering in it. The other eye was dark black, with a blood lily as its pupil, a result of his hatred for flowers. Blood lily being the only flower that naturally bloomed in the forest, which feeds on humanoids' blood. The only flower he keeps in his hair was the last one his mother gave him, which is very singed and almost falling apart at this point. He has a makeshift tattoo on his shoulder of a butterfly that guided his home. At this time in the story, he's finally venturing out of the forest and has had his first encounter with his brother. His second encounter going even deeper into the bunny blossoms. And that's caught up with the story. You can find this info via the first encounter ASMR video. And the bunny blossoms manga is actually from Chompers' point of view. You can see hints with the shadows, the feet, and the butterfly that is flying throughout the manga. His trope is supposed to be scary looking, but he's actually super sweet. He has the highest chance of character development out of all of the characters. Once he gets over his hate boner and works through his trauma, he can definitely be happy. He's basically a soft-spoken kudere, very quiet, but can be very scary. He doesn't understand much and isn't very socially aware of things since he lived with animals for 500 years. He is a precious little Chompers. And now up next we have Yuki. Yuki is the smug, hot fox asshole that Shiry is jealous of. He is the Rizzler, hot British accent, smug as hell, the flirtiest fox you've ever seen. Makes anyone melt in his hands. So, for his backstory, not much is known about him, though he has told a bedtime story to the listener, which is on the Patreon, I'm sorry, a lot of the other characters' lores on the Patreon, because I try to stick, you know, my ASMR channel. People come for Shiry, so I try to keep it just Shiry. So a lot of the lore stuff ends up going on Patreon. But hey, now you guys have it here, and now you know it. Which talks about his past. It's told in the story. It's told in the story of a fox who's basically the best and the strongest, and had an ego of the world. His ego was humongous, huge, massive ego. He had both admirers and people who hated him, but ended up getting ignored by one girl. Despite her being weak, she still worked hard and never asked help from him. He got jealous, tried to ignore her, but ended up not really being able to. One day she got attacked and he was too slow to help, even though she was bleeding, she still stopped the fox from killing the perpetrator. Since she forgave him, they fought a little. Because she forgave the perpetrator. They ended up fighting a little, her and the fox, and she ended up having her bleeding being stopped by the perpetrator. And the fox was able to get her to a medic. He stayed waiting for her. They ended up falling in love, blah, blah, blah. She kept the fox in check and protected him in her own way. But she ended up getting outlived by the fox. And so he doesn't date anyone, pledging loyalty to her even though she's passed. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't flirt, though. That just means that he is not, available for dating and stuff like that. Current day Yuki was sent to Shiry and is the only person that Shiry can't 10D chess at and read. So, of course, this pisses Shiry off and makes Shiry very wary of the fox. The fox is smug, very dramatic, and theatrical. He treats almost everything as a joke and is a tinkerer by nature. Despite coming from the magical realms, it seems like he has no magic, but that's not confirmed. He travels between both continents, being one of the three that can get past the forest, taking magical objects and modern objects and making his own inventions, mixing the two, seeming almost like a magician with his items, blowing both continents' minds with his inventions since they both seem realistic and otherworldly at the same time. You can find out more about Yuki on the Patreon of him telling the story, and I talked about him over the course of a few streams, just basically answering basic questions about him. You could also hear his voice. He has a fancy voice. It's like a fancy British deep voice. I like it. I think it sounds nice. Now, we get to talk about the future of the lore. So basically, Shiry is planning on hiring Chompers and Yuki to the flower shop. This will be the focus of the next manga. Chompers would be convinced because he has the most opportunities to kill Shiry if he's working and or living with him. And Shiry will be able to keep a close eye on Yuki and learn more about him. Like, why is Yuki here? And why can't he get a read on Yuki? And why is Yuki just fine with being here? He just showed up one day and was like, I work here now, and left. Yuki will be an entertainer, showing off his fun inventions. Chompers will restock and basically be any kind of muscle. And Shiry will be showing off the flowers and such. The other two are supposed to keep other customers entertained or to work with other customers while Shiry is busy. There might be ASMR from the other characters as well. And if they do poorly, I might make a separate channel for Yuki, since he's more of a hot fox type rather than cute. And Chompers, maybe I can do lifeless, emotionless ASMR. That could be fun. There are still many questions to be answered and many more expansions to be had, stories to tell and questions to ask. And talking about questions, it's finally time for the Q&A portion regarding the lore. The rest of this video will just be me answering questions you may have either had on Discord, Twitter, or YouTube. So enjoy. You can also ask any questions in the comment sections and I'll do my best to answer. This is only the summed up lore and it's not super expansive. The actual lore is much more than this. Otherwise, this video would end up being multiple hours long. Though I'm happy to answer every question. I did my best to sum up hours of lore videos / lore on top of 15 plus pages of world lore. There's a much more clear-cut lore audios over on Patreon that are all tagged as lore, and there's a free trial for the ASMR tier if you want to binge some lore. Also, this part of the video is going to be a little more messy because I'll be showing the comments through OBS rather than editing like most of the other things in the videos that I've shown you, just because there's a lot of like questions to go through. So this part might be a little more messy. That's all I'm going to say.